In 1995, a group of about 20 people who had been certified to teach the Enneagram Basics course by Maria Biesing and Patrick O'Leary gathered in Culver, Indiana for a reunion of their certification class. This is a video of a presentation I made at that event. I also made the same presentation to a group of Enneagram enthusiasts in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Everyone ready this morning? Yes. Okay, I'll try not to put you to sleep, and we'll start our re-examination of the topics of threat and defense. The ideas for this topic started churning around in the back of my 5 brain not long after I finished the certification program. And it came out of the realization that my weakest area in the presentation was the threat and defense page 6 of the Basics Handbook. And realized that despite the fact that I'd been to about a dozen Enneagram workshops and spent countless hours knocking Enneagram ideas around with other people, we hadn't been talking about threat and defense, not in topics in and of themselves. We talk about gifts, we talk about compulsions, we talk about centers, we talk about arrows, which way do the arrows go, do the wings fly? You know, we've argued every topic across the Enneagram spectrum, but no one talks about threat and defense. And it surprised me that we had forgotten this what I think is a very essential element. In fact, the whole thing is built around the fact that we experience these threats, we defend against them, we get caught in that defense in a compulsive cycle and have trouble breaking out of it. So why isn't anybody talking about it? So part of my purpose here is to put the topic on the table and get people talking about it and get people exploring it in more detail. When I haven't heard people talking about it, I say, is it because Pat and Maria and all of us haven't been doing a good job teaching it? I don't think that's the reason. When we teach this topic in Enneagram Basics, we present it in a way that it's all about helping people understand their type. And that's one of the primary goals of Enneagram Basics as a presentation, is help the people discern their type. So we're presenting it in a way that is descriptive of the type. And we really don't have much of an opportunity to talk about the topic in and of itself. Well, also, the people are listening to us in a way where their primary focus is what type am I? Not really what is threat all about, what is defense all about, how does it tie in to self-identity and compulsion. That's not the focus of attention. So I think we do need to focus on that, because it, as I've said here in my outline, it's really a key element in this whole system. I hear people say, you know, I've been through a couple of Enneagram workshops, and I understand that I have this giftedness, and I come to different and newer appreciations of it, and I understand that I have a variety of gifts besides my primary gift that I need to nurture and expand upon. And I see myself getting into these compulsion situations, but how did these two seemingly opposite things go on in the same person? How did I get from this wonderfully gifted individual that I know that I can be into this robotic machine of compulsion that I know that I sometimes am? And when they ask that question, it says to me, well, they've forgotten all these topics in the middle, this self-identity and the threat and the defense, and how they all interrelate. You know, we use the analogy in teaching basics of peeling the onion. Do you still use that analogy?
No.
Oh. back
Patrick
when,
does.
okay,
Patrick does.
back when I took the,
Back when you were a youngster.
yeah, back in the early days of certification, we talked about each of these topics as being the layer of an onion that you peel off, and you reveal more and more about the personality of the type as you go through each layer. Well, what we need to do is, when you get done, you've got a bunch of onion peels. And we either need to reassemble those peels, or we need to slice the onion through in the beginning and look at the way the topics interrelate to one another.
Chris,
Yeah.
let me add something. When Maria did the certification at the Woods just last week, somebody who was doing their teaching practicum, I was sitting there, and she said a neat thing. She said she was using the onion as an example, and she said when you get to the threat defense, that's like the bite of the onion.
Okay.
So I thought I would just
Yes.
share that.
So what I want to do is talk about how, well, if you look on the second page of my little handout here, I've assembled, you might want to rip these apart so you can refer back and forth. I've taken the various enneagrams or enneagons or whatever we call our little diagrams and reassembled them into a chart so you can see side by side how these topics interconnect with one another. And I just want to go through them sort of left to right and highlight the interconnections and how one leads sort of naturally into the next. We start at the beginning with a gift. And when we call it a gift, we're making sort of a value judgment that it is a good thing. We're saying that this is a strength that we have. It's something that either is good or it is has a great potential for good. We could have called it a talent or a characteristic, or there was once a guy called it chief feature. Remember that word? Although Gurdjieff, I think, used chief feature more to the compulsive side of the type. But when we call it a gift, we're saying that it is something good. And my observation has been that we're good at it. We have a certain skill in it. I assume that there may be 6 who never follow the group, or 3s who always fail, or 5s who don't know anything, but I really feel sorry for them if there are such people. So I think that it's a good thing, and we're good at it, and it is very much a part of us. Now, as we come to understand ourselves and develop an awareness of ourselves and a self-identity, naturally this gift is going to be part of it. Even if we have the most accurate and well-balanced and broad-minded self-identity that you could have, because the gift is part of us, it's going to be part of the self-identity. And because it's a good thing and we're good at it, it's going to be a relatively important part of our self-identity. So the self-identity has to include the gift. Now, we develop this self-identity or this self-awareness at a very early age, as you all know. And we sort of come out of our childhood opinion of the world and suddenly notice that there's a difference between what is me and what is not me. There's something that is me, and then there's a bunch of other stuff out there that is not me. And the fact that we've noticed these differences, we're noticing that the not me's aren't always going to be to our liking. So that the self-awareness is really a recognition that there's a potential for conflict here. That we are, the world is not always going to meet our needs. It's not always going to be to our liking. And that's how we tell, in some ways, the difference between what's me and not me, what's supportive of me and what's not supportive of me. So once you've got this awareness that there's a difference between you and the world, the potential for threat happens. In fact, I'm thinking about making bumper stickers and T-shirts that says that. Threat happens. You know, it's almost inevitable that when we notice these differences, that there is the potential, at least, for threat. Now, the threat is a real survival issue. We talk about this threat being a threat against the self-identity. One of the pitfalls of calling the word self-identity is we don't want to think of it as just our public persona or our conscious opinion of ourselves. This is our real, absolute opinion of who we really are. So when the self-identity gets threatened, it's a real survival threat issue to us. It's not just, oh, well, my reputation's at stake, or I'm worried about what people will think of me. We see it as a real survival issue. And that's an important thing to understand when the defense kicks in. Now, the defense supposedly defends the self-identity, and it does do that. You would think that if I was experiencing a threat, what I might try to do to eliminate that would be go out and get rid of the threat. But if you look at our chart over here, at all of these defenses, they're really about insulating us from the threat and isolating us from the threat. They aren't about eliminating the threat. It's a kind of numb us to the threat. Words like withdrawal, and denial, and anesthesia. That's not a go out and stop the threat or attack the threat or get rid of it. That's a looking the other way. And all of these words, in some respects, are a moving away from the threat. Gurdjieff and Ospensky, and according to Palmer, use the word buffers. Yes, Rose?
Are you saying the defense is a numbness or a nullness?
It's a numbing.
Numbness.
Okay. But some of the people, like I said, Gurdjieff and some of these people talked about buffers as something that sort of cushion us from the threat or isolate us from the threat, rather than going out and dealing with it. And as we'll see a little bit later on, that's one of the pitfalls that we come up against is that we aren't really defending or eliminating the threat. We're just trying to get away from it or isolate ourselves from it, rather than actually solving the problem. Now, the compulsion is what happens when we get caught in this state of constant defense. I used to think that the compulsion was this thing that I had that was an intimate part of me, like the gift was. And I'm moving away from that philosophy now, that I see as the compulsion as the state that I'm in when certain things go wrong with the self-identity and the threat and the defense. And so when we get caught in this defense and we can't get out of it, that's what the compulsion is all about. Now, the compulsion, I look at it as some magnet that sits at the right-hand end of this chart and draws us that direction. I think the things that go on in the middle of the chart push us to that end. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that there are forces in our life that tend to destabilize us and push us towards that compulsion and keep us there once we're there. So let's talk about what those forces are. If you're following my outline, we're down to part 3 here. The pitfalls of a successful defense. I'm sorry, Dan, there are pitfalls to success. I know it's heresy for 3. There are pitfalls to knowledge, too, or at least they tell me, so I don't know.
Well, when you were talking about it, I wrote down, we come out of our childhood with a certain awareness of me that we like and certain that we do not like. I said I suppressed the ones that I don't like. So I can see the egotism right there, boom,
Yeah.
already.
You would think that, hey, if we experience this threat to our self-identity and we defend against it and the defense works, or at least we convince ourselves that it has worked, it may not really have, but if we convince ourselves that it's worked, we think, hey, that's great, that's a wonderful thing. Well, but there are problems here. First of all, this success reinforces the self-identity. See, when you look at these self-identities, I am helpful, I am successful, I am unique, all of these, I am somebody, is whoever I am. The threat is saying, no, you're not. You're not somebody, you're nobody. Or the somebody you are is no good. We don't have any use for you. For example, if I say, okay, I've got all of you here together for this project, but I really don't need your help. And there aren't any goals that we're particularly working to achieve. And sensitivity and insight isn't really an asset for this. And all the textbook knowledge in the world isn't going to get us what we want. And there aren't any particular rules that we have to adhere to. And there's going to be a lot of pain. And it's not very good outlook for this project. And we're going to explore and grow all of your weaknesses that you aren't going to withstand. It's definitely not going to be okay. And your hard work isn't going to help us. Now I've just threatened everyone in the room. Okay? I've said that the somebody that you are either is nobody or you just don't need the somebody that you are. And when we defend against that, you're saying, yes, I am. I really am somebody. The threat is saying, no way, you're not. And the defense is saying, yes, way. You're getting in your I told you so's. And you know how good that can feel sometimes. So it's a validation of who we think we are. You know, if we have a very well-balanced self-identity, that validation can be okay. But the problem is it can go to our head. It can build our ego. You know, in the early days of the O'Leary tradition, if you look back at their book, this column called self-identity was called pride. And they've renamed it to self-identity, I think, appropriately, but the problem comes when self-identity turns into pride. When these statements aren't just my opinion of myself, but they're my egotistical opinion of myself. So a successful defense has the potential to build that self-identity beyond what it ought to be. Now, when we're defending, this is part where I need some of your feedback on, maybe during the discussion period. My experience is that we either go back and try to use our gift as part of the defense, or we at least think that we're using our gift as part of the defense. I look at my own experience when I am in a stressful or a threatened situation, and I withdraw, and Lord knows I do. In fact, Mom and I have a running joke going. When she knows that I'm faced with some crisis or something, she'll ask me how I'm doing, and I'll say, well, not dealing with it is working really well for me right now. So some of my withdrawal is a just run and hide withdrawal. But some of it is, well, I'm going to back up. You know, I wouldn't have been in this mess if I had known enough in the first place. So I'll back up and work on my knowing and my knowledge some more, and then that will defend me. So I tell myself that I'm using my gift to get me out of this situation. Now, I don't know that it takes a case-by-case basis to say whether I'm really doing that in a healthy way or not, or whether I'm kidding myself. I can see in other types here how you might try to tap into that gift as a tool in attempting to defend. But I'm not really sure whether that always happens or how it happens in each of the types. So that's something that I want some feedback from all of you at some point this week. But when we successfully defend, then if we do use the gift, then we not only reinforce the self-identity, but we reinforce the relative importance of that gift within the self-identity. And if we're already convinced that it's a good thing and we're good at it, and now it's saved our tail in the middle of this crisis, it's going to inflate its self-importance within that self-identity. It's going to push out or devalue the importance of any other gifts that we might be aware of, because those other gifts aren't as likely to have helped us in these really tough crises. So those are two things. Well, like I said, both of these things can happen. And when they do, our self-identity is even further out of balance, further out of touch with reality, and the less real our opinion about ourselves is, the more likely we are to be threatened. Because at that point, reality in and of itself becomes a threat. So we have a sort of a destabilizing force here, that when we succeed, if we let that success go to our head, it builds the self-identity, builds the importance of the gift beyond what it ought to be, perhaps. We get out of touch with reality, we get more threat, more defense. If the defense succeeds, it gets worse and worse, it just snowballs. So even if we start out with a really good, balanced approach, there is this risk that it can get out of whack and get worse and worse and worse and push us towards the compulsion. And then we get in what is a state of constant defense. And that's the compulsion. Now, we don't have to be constantly defending the same exact thing. If we get a threat comes along and we defend it, we think it worked, and then another one comes right on its heels, that's just as compulsive as a threat that we can't make go away. You know, if the threats are coming so rapid fire that we're spending all of our time defending, that can be just as compulsive for us as the threats that we can't push away, that we think are always there and we never succeed against.
Chris, I think that's a real important point, because what I haven't heard yet, and I think it's important to bring out, is that we support the threat. Not only do we support our denial or our defense, but we need to have that threat for our self-identity. So we, in some manner, use our gift to narrow and focus our attention so that we can find the threat, because that supports that self-identity.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's not just a case of, at least for me, it isn't a case of the threats just sort of coming along. I think each of us in our own unique way finds those threats, looks for those threats.
Search them out.
Yeah.
Well, and Helen Palmer even talks about the idea that we develop an intuition that's uniquely tuned to spot that threat.
Exactly.
That we don't even have to really see it coming, but we just sort of feel it. It sort of seeps into your bones and intuit that
And it's a
threat's there.
real selective attention.
It is.
So you don't see the rest of the world. You only see that piece that your particular personality type allows in.
But isn't this what was talked about at, I want to use the word addiction, the addiction of wanting the threat so that we can be, in my case, be
Right.
successful
Right.
again. And I'm addicted to that.
Exactly.
Because that self-identity is the whole I am statement. That's I keep pulling all of myself into that as if I were only that. And so anything that helps me to continue to say that is what I'm going to look for. I'm not consciously look for it, but it's something I'm extra sensitive to
Exactly.
because of who I am.
See, my Radex peers call me a shit disturber. It's one of their nicknames for me. I'm always stirring the pot. Well, I'm always stirring the pot because I'm always looking for the fight to prove that I'm strong.
Yeah.
It's that kind of, or stimulate me, yes.
But
That's true. That's for
do
the
you find
kids.
stimulating? You as an 8 find the 5 stimulating. I as a 5 find the debate and the discussion and the knowledge gaining stimulating.
Right.
Dan's going to find the chase and the goals and the struggle stimulating. And all of us are going to find stimulating whatever supports this self-identity.
Chris, in another arena, I was doing some reading a while back on the whole issue of Zion, the Zionist movement, and Herzl made the comment that anti-Semitism was necessary to Jewish identity, and that there was a section of the early Zionist movement who, on the one hand, actually fostered anti-Semitism because it forced Jews to keep their identity as Jews, because there was this threat.
What would they do if they weren't ever persecuted?
Yeah, and so it works in a different arena, but the dynamic is the same, I
I need failure to go in and, I love to go into failure situations that I'm not connected to, so.
It's like the juice, you know. It's like it's how we plug into that electric current, that life force, some way or other.
It's real difficult when somebody says, we didn't really need you.
A friend of mine
What?
is a meteorologist, and he decided that he wanted to move away from Indiana because the tornadoes weren't interesting. He wanted to go to Florida where they had really big storms like hurricanes. Okay, it's because that's what stimulated it. Was that? Let's move on to what can go wrong with the defense. We've talked about the pitfalls of success. Let's talk about the pitfalls of failure. And we've already touched on this a little bit. One of the things that happens is, because this is a survival struggle, our focus becomes narrow. We get preoccupied with survival. Now, I heard a talk one time from a missionary who was, I forget whether they were in South America or Africa or wherever it was, and they were talking about all the humanitarian aid and the food and the sanitation issues and all this stuff. And someone asked them, well now, but you're a missionary. Do you ever get around to preaching the gospel or talking about redemption or forgiveness or any of these things? And he says, well, only after all of this other stuff is done. Because these people are preoccupied with survival. And when you're in that survival struggle, you don't have the freedom to contemplate some of these more loftier or more spiritual sorts of goals. We're too busy trying to defend to really sit down and say, how can I make the best use of my gifts? Or how can I tap into my other gifts? You know, as soon as I put out all these fires that are burning around me, then I'll get around to doing the things that I know I'm capable of doing and achieving my potential. So in some ways, the compulsion is like this state of sitting around waiting for the threat to go away or the defense to work so that you can get on with being your gift. And that's why we see the gift and the compulsion at being odds with one another. But I still don't think the compulsion pulls us into it like we get pushed into it by these other factors.
Say that again, Chris. And tease that out more.
Well, I guess I just have always thought of compulsion as this force that pulls me into itself, that draws me into this robotic state of being, or this robotic action. And I think it's sort of an argument about cause and effect, which I know can get very circular at times. But I'm beginning to think of the compulsion more as an effect rather than as a cause. I see it as being what happens when we get caught in this defensive struggle, rather than being some tangible part of who we are, say the way the gift is a tangible. Now, it may just be that I'm anthropomorphizing this thing and trying to personify it too much, but that little shift of view helps me focus more on the threat defense and less on the compulsion, which gets talked about too much.
You know, Chris, I
Did you
think
have
some people stay in that state of compulsion because it is a way that they begin to know. And that makes sense to me, the way that you explain how if that relates back to your self-identity and that's a cycle that you're in, you can be caught in it because at least you know what it is. And I think some people do that. They stay there because at least they know that pattern.
It is a pattern, and it's a pattern that's been repeated over and over and over again. So it's like, it's like the chute that goes down into the water. It's a path that's worn.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you tried to make a new path, that's harder, more difficult. It's not going to be smooth. You're not going to get as neat a ride. You aren't going to know how it's going to end up. Whereas the compulsion is something that worked all this way. And I don't think it's, I don't get that sense that it's something that kind of draws me. But when I step into it, like the first step of it, I know how it's going to run. And so I know at least I can survive that. Whereas something else I'm not so sure.
I'd like to apply it to golf. What an insight this was for me this morning. Whoa! All of my golfing years, and you'll note I didn't say career, all of my golfing years, my short game, for those of you that do play golf, short game meaning the closer to the green, the shorter club one uses, has always been extremely well developed, very refined. If I'm in a match and they say, if we're 100 yards out, oh man, let's let her hit it, etc. And then off the tee, I would be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. But I had put so much overabundance and confidence, and I'm sure reward from other people into that short game, that when 1 year my self-identity went someplace else and the short game said, get out of here, I have nothing to do with you anymore. I didn't know how to deal with it. It was like something that I had been able to do extremely well, had no clue I was compulsive about it, but there was, and what Maria was just saying, there was not a moment that I did not feel confident of the outcome of that. Sacrifice developing every other part of the game.
We'll take the enemy that we know any day
Oh, you betcha.
over the enemy
You
we don't
betcha.
know.
It's probably a fourth thing, too. It's a finesse shot. Tender, gentle.
Just as a support for everything we've talked about up till now, if you look on the second page, I've lifted a couple of quotes from a couple of the authors. Naranjo took two very long, wordy sentences to take what it's taken me half hours. But the problem with putting it together in such concise terms is you can read through it and you're past it before you know what he's really said. But he says here that in reaction to pain and anxiety, a seeming emergency comes up. And through this corresponding emergency, a corresponding emergency response that precisely in virtue of the perceived survival becomes fixed, becoming a repetition compulsion. And it entails a loss of contact with all but the emergency foreground of experience, dimming of consciousness, automatization, and we become that robot that we sometimes become. One of the interesting things that Palmer talks about, when I first read Palmer, and I read all of her stuff about ways of paying attention, I kind of skipped through it, and I know she's got a tape series about ways of paying attention. And I thought, why do I care how to pay attention? It's what am I paying attention to? I know how to pay attention. I don't need to be a better student. That's what your teachers always tell you. Now pay attention. That's what I thought it was all about. until I started exploring these topics and I see, okay, it's that narrowing of the focus of attention during this defensiveness, during this survival struggle, that is problematic. So if we understood how each of the types did pay attention better, then maybe we could broaden that out and not narrow the focus as much. And I think as we're, if we refer someone to Palmer, it might be good to highlight that for them. Because I know I certainly skipped right over it and said, yeah, well, so what? Who cares how to pay attention? It's exactly what she says here. It's of great interest to me that we've become so preoccupied with naming what our attention is attracted to and not looked at how our attention is organized when we perceive information that interests our type. Now, my next topic here I've labeled most important sentence in Enneagram Basics. And that's the sentence that's on the other handout here, the threat defense sentence off the page. And I make that claim because if you thought Durandio packed a lot of punch into 2 sentences, look what Maria and Pat have packed into 1. I'm going to spend the entire rest of my time picking apart that one sentence in my very Biblish way. I'm sorry. That's where I am. Threat defense is the process of defending oneself against the perceived threat to one's identity. It seems like such a simple little sentence, but it says so much. First of all, let's focus on the word perceived. If we don't perceive the threat, we aren't going to engage any defense against it. It's not going to interest, it's not going to occupy us. We're not going to get caught in a compulsion over it. And so it really doesn't figure into this very much, except for the fact that it still has the potential to hurt us if it's a real threat. It's like the quarterback that goes back to pass, and he thinks he's doing just great, and the next thing he knows, he's face down in the mud with a 300-pound linebacker on his back because he didn't perceive this blitz coming from the blind side. Now, he wasn't compulsive about it. He didn't defend, and so from an Enneagram perspective, we might not be able to say much about it. But it is still just as painful. So there's not a whole lot to explore there as far as Enneagram goes, except to say that watch out for the threats that we're not aware of. And when we're in these survival struggles and focused on defending the self-identity, there may be other aspects of us that are being threatened that we're completely oblivious to. And I've got a couple of good examples of that after I get through this section. So let's say the threat is perceived. Now, it's not always one of these, oh, hark, look over yon hill, cometh a threat. It's not a very conscious and straightforward kind of perception. As I mentioned earlier, Palmer talks about how we sometimes intuit the threat. It sort of just seeps up on us. And Maria and Pat talk about that this threat is also an avoidance. In fact, that column of that chart in earlier times would have been called avoidance. That we subconsciously avoid this, but then I think when it finally does seep into somewhere into our conscious perception, then it's the avoidance turns into threat. Or at least that's my take on how that works. And so once we've noticed somehow this threat at some varying levels of consciousness. Sometimes you know you're threatened. You know you're in trouble, okay? But it doesn't always happen that way. Now there are a lot of there are 2 different things that can happen here. The threat is either real or it's not real. So when we say it's a perceived threat, that should highlight for us that it's our perception and maybe not necessarily reality. So here are the 2 options. It's either real or not real. What if it's not real? Well, does that mean that we're all out paranoids and we're ready for the padded cell or whatever? Well, not necessarily. One of the types of not real threats that we tend to defend against is sort of that anticipated threat that never comes. You know, suppose you're a middle management person in some company, and the suits upstairs keep sending down these unpopular policies that you've got to communicate to the workers beneath you. And every time you do that, they have the kill the messenger attitude. After this has happened about 5 or 6 times, and the next piece of paper that comes down from upstairs, you start writing your speech, you start worrying about how am I going to present it, and you start preparing to defend against this onslaught of discord that's going to come at you. So you get up there and you call the staff together, and you make your speech, and nobody complains. Well, now, I don't know why they didn't complain. Maybe they heard it the last time. Maybe this policy wasn't as unpopular as you thought it was going to be. Maybe they gave up, you know, and decided not to fight you. The trick for us is to notice when that anticipated threat didn't come, so that we aren't still fighting the threat over and over again. You see this in the O.J. Simpson trial. The prosecution puts up a witness, and the defense rips them to shreds. Well, after a couple of witnesses that they've had torn to pieces, the prosecution starts bringing out the holes in their own witnesses to try to stop the defense from doing it. Well, the problem they're having is how many of our own holes do we want to reveal as a preemptive strike? So what we have to watch out for is when do we notice that that anticipated threat isn't there? The other thing is a misidentified threat. You know, we're in a tense situation, we're in trouble, we know there's a threat out there. We're going to be a lot more likely, as we've already talked about, to focus on the part of the threat that interests us, or interests our self-identity, or stimulates us. And that may not be the threat that has the most potential to do us harm. If we misidentify these threats, if we keep defending against threats that never come, then we do end up in sort of a bad light. Kind of reminds me of, you know, we pour all this energy into defending what's not really there. It reminds me of the paranoid poem. It goes, "Last night I saw upon the stair a little man that wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away." But we keep fighting against the little man on the stair, and we're pouring all our energy and all our resources, and we're narrowing our focus against him, and he isn't there, and we can't convince ourselves that he's gone.
Chris,
Yeah.
I have a real good example in my family that just happened that illustrates that. I have a daughter who works in the state of Kansas for the Beverly Corporation. We had a big meeting. Just happened this Thursday, this past Thursday. And she's going to get fired. She knows it, and she's just going to get, and so she's not going to let them fire her. She's written 3 different resignation letters. One telling them to take this job and shove it. One telling them, you know, she really likes this corporation, but she's going on to greener pastures. And one that's somewhere in between. And she's got them in a file folder. She goes to the meeting, and they asked her if she'd take on a new position, which is bigger and greater. And so she's thinking, you know, they've called her and told her they want her to have this meeting and this and that, and she's perceived a threat that isn't there, gotten paranoid about it, written off 3 different forms of, and she got promoted instead. So that's where you take, I mean, that's really how you can get into it.
Larry Brown, the coach, Pacer coach, I see in little lines is that's why he keeps moving. I mean, he's successful, but he thinks he's going to fail someplace. And so before he fails, he moves on to another team.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks he's going to be fired the next day all the time. And of course, everybody else thinks he's terrific and successful. But he lives, I'm hearing that he lives there. That's a wonderful poem. I'd like to get a copy of it. Put it in my desk right in
That's one of
front.
my favorite poems.
This unreal threat, suppose we've defended against this unreal threat. And so let's go back to my outline to the successful defense. You know, we think that we've succeeded in defending against something real. So if we've deluded ourselves into thinking there's a defense, or a threat, maybe we've deluded ourselves into thinking it went away. And that's where the difference between, you know, life-affirming affirmation, when we really do manage to survive a threat, and this sort of ego-building pride comes in, was the threat really real? It's like the story about the guy who every night at sundown goes out and does this ritual dance on his front lawn. And the neighbor says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm keeping the elephants away." He says, "There are no elephants here." He says, "See, it's working." We're out here doing these dances and believing in them and affirming our self-identity and being proud of our gift and saying, "Oh, what a good boy or girl am I." And we're really just keeping elephants away. So that's where this not real threat comes into place. Now, we've picked apart perceived threat. Let's pick apart this phrase, "to one's self-identity." When we say it's the self-identity, is it just the self-identity, or is it the real us? Is it the ego that's being threatened, or is it the essence? And we've already, I don't really have to say much about that because we've already in some of our discussions have highlighted upon that. I want to give you a couple of examples that sort of illustrate a lot of these concepts. If you'll set your time machines back to 1988, to the presidential debate between Michael Dukakis, governor of Massachusetts, and George Bush, who at the time was vice president. And in a scene that's been replayed many times, has been spoofed on Saturday Night Live a number of times, Bernard Shaw of CNN says, Governor Dukakis.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
Some debate moments are less about the substance and more about the passion or lack thereof in an answer. And nothing to me jumps out more than what happened with Governor Michael Dukakis in '88.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial.
If your wife, Kitty Dukakis, were raped and murdered, would you be in favor of the death penalty for her convicted assailant? Now, in a futile attempt not to type Governor Dukakis, we'll say his self-identity was, I am presidential. But Governor Dukakis' version of I am presidential includes the idea that a president ought to be able to clearly explain and articulate their policies, especially policies that are unpopular, especially policies that are different from his opponent, Mr. Bush. And so what we got for the 2 minutes allotted to that answer was a dissertation on why the death penalty is not an effective deterrent to crime, and why we're opposed to the death penalty, and why we can still be tough on crime, but not want to go out and kill people. What we didn't get was much sense of loss over even the hypothetical murder of the man's wife. We didn't get any sense of sympathy or compassion for the victims or the survivors of victims of violent crime. We didn't get any outrage against violent criminals. But I sort of think the governor probably went backstage afterwards and said to his handlers, boy, did you hear how great I answered that question on the death penalty? I really explained the policy really well. And they're all these heart-centered threes, who are trying to sell him. And they're just devastated inside because they know in that moment he's lost the election. He defended the question was a threat. He perceived it as a threat. It was a threat to his identity of I am presidential. But he didn't get all the threat. He didn't get that part of I am presidential, part of what the population wants, is someone who feels their pain and who can make an emotional connection with them. And all it did was reaffirm what everybody had said about Kevin Dukakis, which was that he was this heartless machine who sat up on the tank with a goofy grin on his face. Of course, they said, you know, if you vote for Dukakis, we'll be invading little countries left and right. Sure enough, I voted for Dukakis. We invaded Panama, Kuwait, Iraq, and Somalia. So I guess they were. Should have voted for that wimpy guy, George Bush. But at any rate, enough presidential politics. There was a threat there. He defended against it. He defended against the part of the threat that was of interest to him. He missed part of the threat. It may have actually cost him the election for presidency. So I think that's another good thing. Another little more humorous example about our next speaker, Ms. Joyce Pinkow.
Why do people delight in telling stories about me?
Because it's fun.
5 years ago, I was visiting Joyce up in Detroit, and she took me to the Henry Ford Museum. And I spent all day in the museum just having the time of my life. You know, a whole building full of things for five to look at and wonder about it. I was just in heaven. And I came out talking 90 miles an hour. And I'm talking about the Industrial Revolution, the Information Age, and I'm delivering this dissertation. And Joyce says, you certainly do know a lot of things. Why, thank you. And I go on with my dissertation, being affirmed, you know. That's an idea. It's a good thing, and I'm good at it, and I'm riding high, you know. So I took that as an indication I should go on. A few minutes later, you sound like a human encyclopedia. Oh, well, thank you very much. Now Joyce realized she's miscommunicating. And she says something along the lines of, what I'm trying to say, for instance, shut the hell up, you're boring me to death.
Hey, I was trying to be subtle. Doesn't work.
But what happened was, now I perceive a threat, okay? Because she's hit my hot spot. I don't need your knowledge. I don't want your dissertation. I don't want to have anything to do with all of this knowledge that you gathered and accumulated and are spouting for no good purpose. Inside, the way I was experiencing that was, this was very early in my friendship. She hates me. Our friendship's over. You know, we had made all sorts of plans to do Enneagram work together, to go to certification together. I blew it the second day in Detroit. You know, it's all over. We might as well pack my bags and send it home. Because the real me, has now been killed and destroyed. Because she doesn't like my dissertation on the industrial level. So it was a real survival issue for me. But really all she was saying was, I'm just not interested in that particular piece of your knowledge. Joyce still, I presume, from my experience with her since then, appreciates my gift, taps into my knowledge at times, my wisdom, when I use it appropriately. And we have a wonderful friendship that's lasted years. And so it wasn't.
And still doesn't care about the industrial. And if I never hear about trains again, it would be fine with me.
Yeah, she'll think twice before she takes anybody else.
I hope she doesn't hate me, boy.
The question we have now is, okay, what do we do with this? A lot of times I hear people say, okay, I've got all this Enneagram information. Now what? You know, how do I really get into applied Enneagram? And so I put together a list of questions here. And I don't know that we're always going to have the presence of mind or heart or gut in the middle of a survival struggle to ask ourselves these questions. Maybe if we get a little lull in the battle, we can catch our breath and ask ourselves these questions. Or perhaps we can ask ourselves these as sort of a post-mortem experience. You know, after you've come through this horrible thing and you said, look back and say, boy, was I deep in my compulsion there. How did that happen? Maybe if we go back and ask some of these questions and try to pick it apart a little bit, then the next time something similar happens, we'll have a little broader awareness, a little broader focus and attention, and maybe be able to avoid it. And these questions are really just based on the whole outline above. Is the threat real or not? Are there any threats I'm missing? Is the threat gone now? Can I stop the threat? Or did it never come? What's being threatened? Essence of your will. Here's a good one. Is my primary gift an appropriate defense? You know, we tend to say, oh, I'm in trouble, I'll use my gift. I've heard people say, you know I have this compulsion, but my gift is strong enough that I can overcome it. Well, that's, looking through your keys where the light's better. It doesn't work always that way. Sometimes we need to tap into those other gifts or tap into other people's gifts to support us, depending on what the situation is. Would another gift serve you better? Would other gifts assist in, really eliminating the threat and not just buffering us from it, or numbing it, or ignoring the threat? Is this threat a wake-up call? Can I be loved even if I don't participate? Can I be loved even if I don't help? Can I be loved even if I don't work hard? Maybe I need a broader self-identity, a more accurate self-identity, and see the threat as a real opportunity for growth rather than something that ought to be eliminated or fought against. Again, once we've done this kind of an examination before, maybe we can look back and say, oh yeah, I remember. I defended this way before. Or I got caught this way before. What can my past experiences tell me? And one of the topics that I may say for our potpourri or one of our roundtable discussions, I hear people talk about the idea that, sometimes it's good to go with the arrows. Or sometimes you need to experience the lows to appreciate the highs. Part of me, my life provides me with enough lows. I don't need to force myself into compulsion just for the experience. But it's sort of driven by the idea that every once in a while, the textbook answer seems like the opposite of what we ought to be doing. And I think most of those situations might be that the threat is real, and our gift or the defense that we're using is an appropriate solution to that problem. And it is a big enough and bad enough problem that we need to defend against it for long periods of time. And so behavior, which we know to be aware of when just trying to figure out types of things, might look like we're being compulsive. But compulsion is about lack of choice, about roboticism. It's not about saying, this is my battle, my gift. It's going to take everything that I've got to fight it. By God, I'm going to do it. And so it might look compulsive on the outside, but that's not compulsion. And that's something that we need to think about. Now, that's a dangerous idea because we can rationalize with it. We can say, well, you think I was compulsive, but this was appropriate use of my gift. Maybe it wasn't. So that's where a little prayer and the grace of God comes into it. I would like to get some feedback from all of you for a little bit, hear more of your comments, questions,
Chris, may I ask
thoughts,
you a question?
and then I would like to
I'm
have
on it.
just 5 minutes at the end to talk about items as a wrap up.
because I wanted to pick up on the story you shared with Joyce and yourself. You thought you were killed. What happened after that?
It's interesting that this isn't about threat and defense, but it is an Enneagram story. First of all, I withdrew. Okay, that is the threat and defense story. I showed up, I didn't say anything. I went deep inside myself. Right along the van a little bit. And Joyce, to her credit, realized she may have stomped on my toes just a little bit in a little overkill.
Well, when it's deadly silent after you have.
So,
something changed.
she tried to affirm me in some way. And her affirmation was, you know I know I can come across bullheaded and hard sometimes. But to your credit, you didn't lash out back at me and bite my head off, pick a fight with me. You were strong enough to take it, which was her particular interest. And you didn't just totally whip out on me and fall apart. And I said, wait a minute. I said, if you think that I'm not angry or upset or hurt or whatever, you don't know as much about fights as you thought you did. And then I tried to share with her what I was feeling and what was going on inside that she wasn't seeing. And you know, that's what Joyce was needing from you at that point in the early stage of our relationship is, can you put up with the fact that sometimes I'm going to run over you when maybe I shouldn't have? Are you strong enough to not whip out on me? And so she was affirming me from my compulsive withdrawal, unfortunately. But we worked it out and talked about it and chatted about it.
And then he got me drunk that night.
And that's a different story.
Yeah.
Joyce, when you relate, when y'all were relating the story, I work in a very safe place because we all know our Enneagram number. And I'm thinking in terms of threat and defense in two ways. One, we have 2 5s in our office and we can go up to them and say, in 25 words or less, could you give me the following information? And they kind of laugh at our staff meetings and they go, okay, somebody's over there counting the number. And then in another way, we know that we can stand up and go, wait, you know, hold on here, I need a few minutes to adapt to this change in my schedule. And we combined 2 offices several months ago, and things weren't going as smoothly as they had before. And then it dawned on one of our ones that they don't know their Enneagram numbers, and we don't either. So let's get the Enneagram in here and let's straighten this problem out. So we know that there are
Take this pill. You'll be better.
Fix this situation. So we felt like there were internal and external threats. We had internal threats from ourselves and then the external threats that other people were putting on us. And so we tried to put a star on our forehead after we solved the problem, or like with 5, go in and put the star on the forehead. In 25 words or less, have a little humor, let the child within us play, which is all our 7. And it worked real well in our situation.
My question was, for you, Joyce, remember back this time when you were giving Chris the feedback about, you know, you really handled that well, etc. Did you really believe that, or was there some apprehension about seeing Chris's, in your case, weakness or his falling apart inside?
I had no indication that Chris was falling apart. Inside of me, I would have never known he was falling apart. It was I think what I said to him was something about he could have been a history professor or it was some zap kind of comment, you know. Remembering that I'm an 8, I figured I'd already given you a couple of hints. What's the matter with you?
It wasn't so much that you were being too subtle, but the method that you chose was affirming of my self-identity
Right.
rather than expressing your displeasure with what was going
Right.
on.
Oh, it's sarcasm.
No, I've heard Joyce's sarcasm.
What it really was is, first of all, it was a fairly new relationship. And so what I was struggling with was, how do I find a way to tell Chris to shut up without hurting his feelings? So I was struggling with a way of how do I do that?
You were trying to put closure on it by comment.
Joyce, what was so threatening about him babbling on?
There wasn't anything threatening about it. It was boring.
Boring, but I have a neighbor who's an Canadian. I came back from Italy. I went over and said, "Buongiorno," and she said, "Quit showing off." And in other words, she indicated to me, as you did to Chris, that there's something the matter. There's something going on here that is threatening me.
Well, I think it's the sort of black and white approach that is somewhat typical of A. It either is very important or it is not important at all. There's
Exactly.
Little middle ground.
Right. And what was interesting, what I wanted to get at, which I wasn't getting from Chris, was his reaction to this stuff. How did you feel about this? You know, I want it all exactly like Dukakis.
Yeah.
I wanted the passionate, emotional response, and what I was getting was a history lesson.
I got it.
Like, did you really enjoy this?
And
how did
Right.
you feel about
is-
it? What did you get excited about?
Right.
The fact
All
that
of
I
that
was-
self-revelation of the five, that the five doesn't even have a notion
well,
anybody
it-
could be interested in.
Yeah.
the fact that I was sharing, disgorging all of my hoarded knowledge was sort of a celebration of the
That's
fact,
right.
I wasn't feeling emptiness. I was feeling abundance. And so part of what was disgorging all of this useless information from me was my enthusiasm. It was my way of
Right.
saying, Joyce,
Yeah,
I'm
I had a
telling
great
you,
time.
I did have a great time.
Yeah, and see,
Thank you
I
for
missed
bringing
all
me
those.
here.
I missed all
So
that.
she missed all of that.
You know. And when Chris finally came out of that withdrawal state, and my sarcasm is like this compared to Chris's. and he came out of that. I said something to him. I'm not real sure. Probably that, boy, you really took my whatever grade. And he came at me with and it was like, oh my God, I've heard him. Well, I felt this tall. I had absolutely no intention of hurting him. I was just trying to get, I was trying to get at the emotional side.
Trying to take care of your needs.
It was a shock. I mean, it was a shock to recognize
Well,
that I
in
heard it.
defense of the former governor of Massachusetts, I have to presume that he does feel terrible about violent crime.
Sure.
And the loss of his wife would be a devastating experience for him.
Of course.
But in an already stressful situation, like a national debate, is he going to be able to tap into his secondary center, if he was a 5, that heart center, and express it under that kind of scrutiny and that kind of pressure?
Joyce?
When I prepared this presentation, I thought, Chris, what you need to do is you ought to write the speech that Dukakis should have given. And every time I wrote it, it came out just as cold. You got a lot of nerve, Chris. Get up here bad mouthing without being able to share his feelings on national television. Millions of people, and I'm going to be able to do it in front of 20 and one of those little words.
So Chris came back with some kind of a comment that helped me to realize that I had hurt his feelings. And then from there, that opened the door to more conversation about, and from my point of view, I don't know from Chris's point of view, from my point of view, that really helped our relationship move a lot. I mean, we really moved forward with it. Because then my needs were also being met. We got the emotional connection, the knowledge of each other. This is what I was trying to say, Chris. Well, this is what happened to me, Joyce. And so that happened. The relationship developed from there. And then he got me talk. So.
I'm wondering, Joyce, if when you realized that you had hurt Chris, would Chris have known that you, in other words, did you indicate to him somehow, what was your reaction, I guess, once you realized you had hurt him?
Well, I think I had, and it's part of what I can, if I allowed myself right here, you could hear it. And I think Chris heard it.
Yeah.
I get exactly this. I get this waver in my voice. I get these tears in my eyes. It's like, my God.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's exactly that.
At some point it was more obvious to me that my knee-jerk response back at her was hitting her pretty bad too. And I think the survival of these situations.
Not all ACE are alike. Not all ACE would show that. That's why I'm
Sure.
wondering about.
No.
One of the things that I might ask some of you to do is to think about a time, to do some of these questions here. Think about a time when you really caught yourself in compulsion, and say, what was it about this situation that particularly touched my self-identity, and were there parts of it, was part of the problem that there were parts of it that didn't affect my self-identity, like the examples that I've been giving you, and see if that is a big issue that maybe we need to highlight when you're presenting this. And I would also, at some time this week, or just sitting around the beach or whatever, give me some feedback on what to do with this material. Is this a segment out of another workshop? Is this a follow-up evening of sharing from people who've just been through basics? Do we divide this up and try to emphasize some of these themes more fully in Enneagram Basics itself? What can we do with these ideas? And am I right that they are, in some cases, underappreciated? Do we need more emphasis on these topics or not? Or is it just that I haven't seen it?
I was going to say that, of course, this is a whole basis for threat defense. It is Naranjo's insight. And threat defense is his whole basis for developing the Enneagram the way he does it. And therefore, you do, that's the line through which we come to, is his particular perspective. The thing I would say about a basics workshop is, just as you did not catch it so well then, so most people coming to basics don't catch it so well then. It's like self-identity is my I am. That's how we tend to experience it. And therefore anything that says that is not me and my totality is a death threat. And that's why it's so very important.
When you finally begin to own your type, you go through an adjusted self-identity. That in and of itself is an adjustment of self-identity. And perhaps until you've been through that initial, I'm not really the person I thought I was, can you even be open to the possibility that there's fine-tuning to be done.
And if in basics we really are careful to help people at least hear, and I don't know if they do hear very well in basics, that self-identity is true, but limited, not an absolute. And see, that's very key. Because that's basically what you've been talking about. It's limited, it's not an absolute. And you mentioned threat and avoidance. And threat is an avoidance in this sense that in a defensive stance, we avoid dealing with that arena of life we perceive as threatened. That's why it was originally called avoidance.
Maria, talk more about when you said the self-identity is a limited part of it. When I think about it, I think of it as that really is what it's all about in the core of that particular person with that number.
No,
and that many things revolve around that.
No, that's the arena that they value most in their life, but it's not all of them. Like the 2 is I am helpful. And so if at any point you wipe out that helpfulness, they cannot be helpful, then the feeling is one of I am not, of I'm being threatened. Okay? And so the tendency is to avoid anything that's going to wipe out that helpful state. Now, the 2 is also a person of justice, is also a person of perception, is also a person of knowing, is also a person of inner harmony, etc. You could add all those other things.
It's like you're not just I am helpful. That doesn't encompass all that you are as a 2. I mean, you are so much more
And when
than
you're
just
not
that.
helpful, you're not worthless.
Yes.
Right.
Thank
And
you.
when I'm not being knowledgeable, I'm not worthless.
Okay.
But I thought I was.
That's
Right.
And that's the piece that it's hard to get across to people in the short time usually that you have for basics. If you're able to give basics over a longer space of time and give people exercises to work with between sessions, then you can do that. And actually, this whole chart, you'll see again, a little addition to it, when I talk with you, because we do use this, and actually I do develop this in other workshops. But I think that's also what we have to realize.
We're in process all the time.
Right.
So one workshop isn't going to get the whole.
Right, and how much you can do with the particular group you have at the time you have, that has to be something that you can discern. How much it is. And to say it's very important and it's key, which I'm sure all of you really do, it just sometimes doesn't connect because everything's new. Or
By the
must.
time we get to this piece, they're kind of.
And you can't get to it before you build enough of a foundation for understanding where it comes from. But I think it's really good to pull it out, emphasize it, and work with it.
I'd like to talk about the phrase I am somebody. As I was rehearsing or thinking about this presentation, and I got tired of reading off I am helpful, I am something, I would just substitute in the phrase I am somebody. I am somebody, whoever I am. I think I did use the phrase I am somebody along the way. Pretty soon I thought, hey, I sound like a Jesse Jackson. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the kinds of motivational speeches that he gives to inner city youth or the poverty youth or disadvantaged kids. But these are kids who probably don't see themselves as being very gifted, don't have much to hang a self-identity onto. They're surrounded by violence, poverty, homelessness, helplessness, really difficult situations. And so he sort of leads them in a cheer, where he says, everybody repeat after me, I am. And they all yell, I am. Somebody, and they all shout somebody. And it's a whole cheer that he leads them through, and that's the recurring refrain. He's I am somebody.
I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be young, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be small, but I am somebody. I may make a mistake, but I am somebody. My clothes are different. My face is different. My hair is different. But I am somebody.
He's trying to pull them up from nobody into being somebody as a first step. those of us who perhaps egos are a little too inflated at times, or whose self-identity is a little too strong, maybe we have something to learn to step down to a very humble, but very confident, I am somebody. You know, and I would read down the list and do all these I ams, and substitute the word I am somebody. We all have all of these within us. And so what would happen if we adopted an I am somebody attitude? I am somebody. You are somebody. Or a bunch of somebodies. We're all just somebody. We're all part of this group. We're all part of this world, this creation, work of the Creator. If that's the self-identity we have, as being just like all of you, just somebody, part of creation, what can threaten that? Is there any real threat to that sort of self-identity? And if there is no threat, what is there to defend? And if there's no defense to get stuck in, there is no compulsion. And then all of us are out of jobs. But I would gladly be out of the job if everybody felt I am something. Something for the all.
Thank you very much.
I thought some people that we have attempted to introduce the Enneagram to, that people we would think would really embrace it, said, I do not want to be identified with a number. Which says, and I was thinking about your statement about I am somebody, it says, I'm a composite by myself, and I don't need a one-digit number to identify myself with and surround myself with. And they go on. Maybe we're the ones who are sick.
Well, you know, after hearing some of Rick's experience last night at the social, if someone said to me, come in and tell me for an hour, what is Enneagram all about? I might give this presentation and then say, oh, by the way, there are 9 types. I would emphasize it more than that. But this is what Enneagram is really all about. And the types are a way to see how we fit into this mechanism, in this process. But this is what Enneagram is about. It's not about necessarily about what number. It's about how do I deal with these issues. And understanding that your number, understanding your type, is a way to tap into that.
Chris, in terms of this particular presentation that you gave, if you did a weekend basics, I think this, going into this in a lot of detail, I don't think people will get. The depth of it, because there's so much more. In terms of if you were to develop this or do this more, I think an area where you might want to consider developing more is the area of threat. I think you've done a good job with the area of defense, but I think you could expound more on the area of threat and how we need threat, how we manufacture threat in our life, how each of us focuses our attention to that threat, the pieces that we were talking
And
about.
that's hard for people to hear.
Yeah.
Because
I think
you
what
have
I'm-
to have some sense of, for somebody to look for us to sit here and say, now some of this you people manufacture that would be hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time I've thought of it that way.
But I think it's a real important piece to it.
Mm-hmm. And I think you could develop it and share it with the Enneagram world in broader context. If you were willing to put it in some kind of written type form. I'll give you a couple of suggestions.
It sounds like it belongs in the codependency.
Right.
And
I've never thought in terms that
that's
we.
the one workshop I haven't been to.
Huh.
So maybe that's why I sort of focused on it as a missing piece.
Well, from a personal bias and prejudice, I would hate to see it limited to the codependency or that thing. I think there's a lot more to it than that whole issue. The other piece, in terms of on the second page, the areas of all these questions or things that we might want to, or rather it's on the first page, opportunities for intervention. There's a Zen story, if you don't mind my taking a few minutes to share with you, of a man who walks down the road, and it's a new road, and he's never been on this road before. It's a huge hole in this road, and he falls into this hole, and it takes him years to get out. He has no idea how to get. It's steep, it's deep, it's dark. He has no idea where he is. He doesn't know what the consistency, how to get out. So he struggles and struggles for years and years. Finally, he gets out of the hole. And another day, he's going for a walk, and he walks down the same road, and he falls into the same hole. Okay, and he goes, I've been here before. Okay, and so he struggles and struggles. It doesn't take him quite as long, but it's still a struggle to get out of that hole. But he manages to get out of it. And another day he goes for a walk, and he goes down the same road, and he goes, there's a hole on this road. I remember that. Okay? And he falls into it again, even though he knows it's there. But it doesn't take him quite as long to get out of it. But he finally gets out of it. And another day he goes for another walk, and he goes down the same road. And this time, he manages to avoid the hole. He goes faster. And then on another day, he decides to go for another walk. And this time, he goes down a different road. Okay. And that's what all these questions, opportunities for intervention, that's really the questions that you've put down there is really the whole process of self-growth. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have to keep doing it over and over and over until we learn the lesson.
The story could go on, Joyce, because on a new road, you don't know where the holes are there.
Exactly. And it's a different road, it's different pitfalls, and it requires different gifts. Exactly. That's the whole stuff.
Thank you all for this opportunity. Next class is going to tell us how to breathe or get in touch with our bodies.
Oh, that's how